Looking beyond our shores, we can see the southern islands of Singapore, and off in the distance, the Riau Islands of Indonesia. To the north, there's Johor. Beyond that, miles and miles of ocean spread out in all directions as far as Sumatra or Borneo. But Singapore wasn't always an island.
Had you visited this spot 7,000 years ago, you wouldn't have seen any ocean, just forests and streams. In fact, if you felt energetic enough, you could have walked from Singapore to Borneo, Java, or even Bali. Why? Because back then, these areas were connected as part of one huge landmass, not isolated as separate islands.
Glaciers came and went during the most recent geologic period known as the Pleistocene. What happens when the glaciers formed? The vast fields of ice require water, and the water ultimately came from the ocean. Geologists believe that the sea levels may have been as much as 100 meters lower than they are today. There were several cycles of glacier formation and melting. The South China Sea, the Straits of Malacca, or the Sunda Straits are not that deep, which means that Sumatra, Peninsular Malaysia, Borneo, Java, Bali, and of course Singapore had a land connection between them on several occasions. When the glaciers formed, these areas were connected. When the glaciers melted, they became islands.
So, what does this Pleistocene have to do with our forests and the animals that live in them? Well, many of these trees have seeds that don't travel long distances, don't float, can't tolerate seawater, and are not carried by birds, yet so many of them are widespread, found not just in Singapore, but in forests throughout the region, such as Sumatra, West Malaysia, Borneo. So how did they get to all these places? The only explanation is that they must have traveled very slowly, generation by generation, kind of marching across the landscape during times when all these islands were connected together. I'm surrounded by saplings of a species known as Hopia mangarawan, and their mother is just behind me. And all saplings from that tree are found just within a 30-meter radius of that mother tree. It may take as many as 100 years for this little guy to reach the reproductive size of its mother. So think about that. This species requires 100 years just to migrate 30 meters, and yet it's found from Sumatra all the way across to Borneo. That must have taken thousands of years to achieve, and I find that absolutely mind-boggling. Did you ever stop to think that our forests are home to many species of animals that don't swim? Things like mouse deer, pangolin, slow loris, squirrel, or flying lemur. Yet these same species are found living on islands in the middle of the sea. Just like the plants, these animals must have been found in the vast continuous forests of the region and became stranded when the mountains that they were living on became islands when the valleys were flooded to become the shallow seas we know today.
The rising sea levels, following the melting of the glaciers, isolated the large mountain ranges in the form of separate islands, such as Sumatra or Java. The trees continued their march across the region thousands of years later, when a new glacial period would have reunited the islands once more. This implies that our large forest trees have been isolated from similar patches in Johor and other areas for over 7,000 years. ever since Singapore was converted into an island by rising seas. These trees may once again expand outward when the next bout of glaciation arrives, provided, of course, that we still have some primary forest left when that happens.
All that remains of our original forests are a few patches at Bukit Timah in the central catchment area, some trees scattered about at Changi, and perhaps some on Pulau Tekong. But what we've inherited is part of a larger, far older forest system, one that is incredibly fanned across the region in small incremental steps, sometimes diversifying and speciating along the way. We are not guardians of little bits of heritage that persist in our nature reserves, but instead, we're stewards of a part of something much bigger, much more significant, which is why we should play a more active role in the preservation of these magnificent ancient forests.